Hello, everyone, and welcome. And really pleased to have you join the second of our special 2024 Conversations with Gold Medalists. I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be joined by Mike Hoog. I've known Mike for a couple of years in person, but for many, many years by reputation. And he's generously agreed to join today for a conversation which came about really because part of my presidential theme this year was about asking everyone to commit to a call to action that had an impact around people and planet. And as part of that, I committed to sharing knowledge. And I was lucky enough, particularly early in my career when I first moved to London, to be influenced and really inspired by many amazing engineers. And when I actually met Mike in person, I guess his reputation preceded him, but I was incredibly inspired by our conversations. And I felt that not everyone necessarily had those opportunities that I had had. And I wanted to create space for as many people as possible to also join in these conversations and be equally as inspired. So, Mike, thank you for joining. Really privileged again to have you here in this conversation, but also that you are able to share a bit of who you are and your background with many aspiring engineers around the world.
Well, thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you for such a nice introduction. We're very, very fortunate to have you as our president. I was looking forward to this year in particular, and you're having a really great impact. So thank you very much for inviting me and setting this up so that people can listen to as much as they can bear of gold medalists talking about their careers.
Wonderful.
And I'm looking
Wonderful.
forward to answering questions, you know.
So many of you will have joined because you're already familiar with Mike. Mike is a renowned building engineer and former vice president of IStructE. And he's been pivotal in the growth of Bureau Happold since 1976, serving as senior partner from 2011 to 2017. He's contributed to numerous landmark projects that we'll hear about in a second, globally, including the Queen Elizabeth II Great Court at the British Museum and the Kogold Courtyard at the Smithsonian. As many of you will know, he's an advocate for sustainable design, and his work is influenced by nature, emphasizing resource efficiency and beauty. He's currently the chair of the zero carbon cement startup Ceratec Limited from Imperial College. And he also teaches as an adjunct professor of creative design at Imperial College and has significantly impacted the engineering profession through education and professional leadership, which we'll get into in this conversation. So again, really happy to have you here, Mike, and look forward to hearing a little bit about your background.
Fine. Thank you very much for that intro. In some respects, you'll see some of the things that Tanya's already mentioned in this slide, but I won't dwell on any one slide because I've got quite a few. I want to give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of the things that inspired me in my career, the people that inspired me, and the messages that I'd like to throw out there for people, particularly those just starting their career. Or looking for a change, perhaps, you know, looking to bring something more into their careers. So this is a kind of introductory slide, shows some of my projects, some of my interests, and the sorts of things that I've got involved in that Tanya's just touched on. So if I just move on. So one of the things, you know, what has inspired me, it says there, and I thought big thing at the beginning of my career was being inquisitive and being kind of, and I think this is a great thing about when you're young, you are like a sponge. You should be absorbing all sorts of influences and getting excited by almost anything. But I also put and heart, because it's not just about the head. You know, there's no point having a career that's determined only by the head. You need to, what is really getting me excited? What do I feel that bit more passionate about than other things? And as a teenager, we didn't have the internet, it didn't exist. We had libraries, we still do, fortunately, but this library in the middle there, they built just about the time I'd got really excited about finding more and more books. And it became my inspiration for finding out more about the world, going there every Saturday. It was effectively like switching on Google. And one of the things that really excited me was the Sydney Opera House, that it was coming close to completion, and there was a lot of talk. And another one of the things was with the suspension bridges. The Severn Bridge had just been opened when I was I don't know, about 10 years old or something. Humber Bridge was about to be built. Lots of exciting things happening in the world of engineering, which started to get me asking more questions about who does this sort of stuff. And in the books I was reading, I could see that people planned cities, had no idea London was trying to get itself planned. We had the M25 being built very close to where we lived. And this was the big urban motorway of the UK. And Botscoter bridges were collapsing, including the UK, Germany, Australia. And I thought, how on earth can something as terrible as that happen when you have people supposedly responsible for getting it right? So it was up in my it was in my face. It was what I was seeing in the library. I was exploring music. I was exploring art. I was exploring all sorts of things. But this looked like a career. So having done a bit more science at school than art, because I wasn't very good at drawing, painting, I did science, and then I applied for my year out before going to university. I applied to Hove Arup, and they offered me a job for, I think I was there for about 6 months, 8 months, and I came across Ted Happold, who was running the big team that I was a small part of. And Ted was working with Fry Otto, fantastic German-based engineer come architect. And we, at my age of 18, found myself working at Hove Arup on this crazy building, like looked like no other building. This model here was built, and I was responsible for testing it and seeing whether and when it would buckle, and predicting that from the model behavior without destroying model, which wouldn't have been very popular. And suddenly my eyes were open to this world, a completely different world that I'd not imagined. I thought engineering might have been quite interesting, but it was totally absorbingly fascinating. Fry was had written books, was doing research around the commonality between how nature build and how we should build. And it was all very much about minimal materials, because in nature, the life uses its materials that are available to the greatest possible efficiency, because they're expensive to get to an animal. They take a lot of their energy. And so I started to be inspired by nature, and then picking that up when I went around, and seeing natural forms in the architecture, in the bridges, in the buildings that were at Cambridge where I was studying. And this glum photograph of me is when we took a tour sponsored by the college to go and look at Eiffel's bridges around France. And I found that very exciting and inspiring. The sort of beauty of the man-made objects when they were sort of organically conceived, coming out of the valleys, taking the railways across the mountains, was really inspiring. So those sorts of people, Ted Happold, Fry Otto, and others, became a really pivotal point in moving my career. And it was when the people I'd met at Hove Arup decided to set up a new firm down in Bath called Bureau Happold. I went with them. I didn't stick with the firm. I went with the people, because they were the ones that had excited me. They seemed to be doing exciting projects, and I just wanted more of it. I didn't want to risk losing them. That was the most important part. And weirdly, again, one of my themes here would be expect change unexpectedly, rather than when I left university. I didn't start doing design work straight away. Ted got me up to Bath University, where he was prof, and I was researching air-supported structures, bubble inflated structures, and I thought this was the big thing. And it was interesting and it was stimulating, but it was unexpected. But the sort of potential of these big air-supported structures to cover not just stadia and so on very, very efficiently, but even whole great townships like this potential township in Alberta did make it a very exciting potential new way of building. And it began to make me realize that the buildings that we were talking about were going to have big impact on people, whole great communities under very large, complex roofs or unconnected designs. And this one did get built in Riyadh, which sits really in the sort of desert on the outskirts of Riyadh, and through membrane structures and solid structures created a wonderful unexpected environment for people to use and enjoy. And so I began to realize, buildings aren't just for their own sake, I suppose, that they are ultimately for making better lives. And I suppose that came quite early to me. It wasn't something they taught me at university at all. So I also say here, it's good to jump, or at least, recognize and allow yourself to be pushed into the deep end, which is what happened when I was about 29. I'd done my research work. I got a PhD. I was set up to start doing some design work finally, which was what I was assuming I was going to be doing. And off I went. I was kicked out to go to Africa and show a team of people who'd never put up a tent as big as this or at all how to do it. And well, funny enough, I'd never done anything like this either. So in the middle of in Harare, in Zimbabwe, I was thrown out to do something big and challenging that I'd never done before. Absolutely scared stiff, but you have no choice. You're there. You've got to do the job. So you learn. You pretend that you know what you're doing, and lo and behold, it turns out you did know what you were doing. And then almost immediately with the success of that, I was thrown over to Hong Kong to put up something very weird, cable net over these walls, which were creating a cultural center. Cable net had to be smothered in concrete. It were troughs of, it was actually beams around the cables. Whole technology of how to do that was really, really tricky. And what happened there was, it was me, the English speaker, and a Japanese engineer who had to work together. One was from the contractor, I was from the designer firm, and we had to work out how to solve all the problems of constructing these cable nets and adding them in concrete. And we didn't speak each other's language. So we started doing it with numbers and doing it with sketches, and how we communicated, I in retrospect realized was really, really important. And so it was a wonderful test at a very early stage in my career. And with that sort of collaboration with Mr. Higashi, I started to realize the collaborations that you can form when you're engineering are absolute gold dust. Collaborating with the right people, not just good engineers who can become your mentors, but also architects and very good clients. And so some of these very early projects that I was fortunate enough to be put in charge of, they had brilliant clients who were passionate about doing things differently, wonderful architects who knew or had the confidence to do that. And I was there, supporting that and bringing the technical ideas in. So this is the Imagination headquarters in London. It's still there and is visitable, although they're a little bit particular about who goes through the front door. And that's in London. And also, this project in the Millennium Dome, just ahead of the celebrations, the UK celebrations of 2020. Finding out how on earth you're going to persuade builders to build something like this that looks like sculpture, but is actually an occupiable building with people inside it, lifts and escalators, and so on. And this was with Branson Coates, particularly Nigel Coates, an absolutely wonderful collaborator because he pushed you and pushed the boundaries. And that's very inspiring for us as engineers. If you're working with people who are going to push you and say, no, but I don't want to do anything that anybody's done before. Fantastic. Jump at that opportunity. Always be looking for not doing the same thing, project by project, so you learn. And what looking back, I realized was so important was this creating a reason, a purpose, and what I call an agenda. And I think Fry Otto and the natural world and bringing natural forms and solving our engineering challenges by thinking about nature and how nature would do it seemed to have become a bit of an agenda. And when you're in a meeting, and you're doing that a lot of the time, or even just with colleagues, don't sort of sit back and wait until somebody wants you to have a thought. Sit forward. That's the way I put it to people, with some ideas of what you want to achieve, and you will make a difference. An engineer has skills, has knowledge, but they have to also have this agenda and be with that. You want to make a difference. Sit forward, speak, don't wait to be asked, and off you go. And that seemed to have become, I got enough confidence through what I'd done up to this point. So here I must have been about, let me think, this would have been I was doing projects like this with Foster and Partners back in the late 90s, just moving into 2020. So I was in my 40s by that stage. So it has taken me rather the longer than I think it should have to get that confidence. So that now I was sitting forward and talking to architect about how we, with engineering thought, my particular thinking about natural forms could change the ideas around projects. So British Museum and this sort of soap film inspired form to make an incredibly lightweight roof was one of them. And then we moved on again with Foster and Partners to the Gateshead shell, which used to be called the Sage, now it's called the Glass House, and incredibly light, using the form, the shell-like action. This one, that's the Smithsonian, the courtyard. Again, different way of putting a beautiful, elegant shell form over a museum courtyard. Dresden railway station, Fosters were really in whether a membrane solution could work here, not something that we'd worked together on membranes before. And that was a chance to come up with something, again, fresh and new. And having done that, it was natural to go for one of the biggest projects we ever did together. It's a giant conical form in Kazakhstan, using cable nets. It was very exciting. On the right-hand side, you can see tiny little people walking over the cable net. Very big concrete base, but then the gigantic conical cable net. So that having the agenda to bring to the table and a passion to bring it into the projects allowed those sorts of projects to come through. And I think, therefore, it's worth me talking about communication, co-creation. I started to realize that this act of co-creating solutions was really important. The client, the architect, and the engineer working together to make solutions. And you look back to that first inspiration in my teens with Utzon and Arup that made the Sydney Opera House possible, with an inspired client, of course, who did the competition. And you've got Utzon's sketch here on the bottom left, and then you've got what I assume is Arup's model to show the practicality and the way it could actually be created. And I realized with my experience at the Bath University, where we had to pick a lot of models and so on, and the way I was learning to communicate, this had become a really important way of how I was persuading clients what was the right way to go on projects. So here's an interesting photo. Very rare to get photos of people in design meetings, but there I am showing off to the clients for this project in Kazakhstan, different ways we could build it, trying to get their engagement and input, and sort of selling the ideas, in that case with physical models, but also realize that working with architects, here's me on the left, architect in the middle, and client on the right. I could see that this way of using sketches had become very, very important, and sharing those sketches, something that some architects do, but many didn't. And I found myself having to take my notebook into the meetings and make sure we talk to each other with diagrams, sharing the ideas. And so that's what I looked back ultimately on my notebooks, and I could see some of the ideas that I was trying to explain to other people, maybe it was an engineer in the office or the architect, to try and make them love it as much as I did, make them want to adopt those sorts of ideas, or to say, no, 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 I like it, but I prefer it if, and then they could join in the sketch and come up with further ideas, this co-creating and using sketches for that. So I thought I'd mention that because in the end, someone persuaded me to try and pull all these ideas together into a book. So there is now this book called Drawn Thought. It's just digital at the moment, but it actually throws together a whole pile of sketches that I could find still in my notebooks and puts them against some of the photos of the projects. And I think it sort of captures that idea of in the moment, in a meeting, 2 people, 5 people, whatever it is, if you have a shared sketch that you can all contribute to, you can see what's in people's minds far, far better than if you're just using words. Words become pretty poor conveyors of ideas about space and connection and flow of the form and so on. So it was nice to capture it into a book. Maybe a few people will read. And expect turning points, because I have to mention that it was only 30th of May 2019 that I finally really woke up to the issues of the climate emergency. I won't talk about in detail about exactly how that happened, but Steve Tompkins, the architect, was absolutely pivotal to that. Recognizing the climate emergency, recognized that I had something, I contributed to that in my career to that point. I made a lot of effort to ensure that the structural engineers set up a declaration of climate emergency to match the architects, and then we tried to spread it across other engineering professionals. And at the Institution of Structural Engineers, they embraced the ideas very strongly and helped support us as we made that declaration. And you'll see institution, a lot of articles and a lot of background assistance that we try to give to professionals to help them control the levels of carbon, measure carbon, embodied carbon in their projects by the same methods as everybody else, standardizing all of that. And now trying to influence at a wider level government policy, regulation, and so on. So it became a very important part towards the end of my career. And people wonder, and they ask me, what should I be doing? And this diagram, and I used it in my gold medal presentation as well in 2020. We must and can do a lot to reduce our carbon footprint. We can cut the carbon in our designs. We can build less, persuade clients that do they really need the building to be that big, or maybe even do they really need a new building? And we can reuse old buildings. And you can see with the stars, each one, you can have a bigger impact. As engineers, your personal footprint is just one person. But if you can persuade a client to half the size of a building, that will have a times 100, times 1,000 impact. And even beyond that, if you can start persuading people to think differently about design and what matters about the built environment, and even start to think about the economic equations. Why do we value so much GDP in our countries? Why don't we value the quality more strongly? So this idea of shifting to a new way of thinking, a new paradigm, if you like, starts to bring in a different quality to people's lives in the built environment. And it means that you're setting new priorities into what you're trying to achieve with your project, way past a little bit of structural efficiency, or, obviously making absolutely sure that people's safety is at the forefront of your mind. People's long-term security in an environment that will continue to support them and their families and their families' families in the future. So we have to start looking much wider, further forward for the context of our projects. It's not just about the now; it's about the future. And one of the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with is Oliver Broadbent, who's helped me in some of my teaching and inspired me a great deal. And he and James Norman have written a very worthwhile book that was published very recently by the institution that you could look out for. and also an excellent book that's been very important to me, Kate Rayworth's Donut Economics. It helps you understand when people are talking about we need to go further. And of course, it's difficult for a very young engineer to necessarily have that much influence. But as you grow and you have a stronger voice, you can start to talk to your client more intelligently about, are they using the right parameters for their project outcomes? Should they be looking further? And I think for the future, if we want our projects to have a long life and be respected in the long-term future, we have to expect the standards of future generations will be much, much higher, and they will look back on us with dismay if we failed to recognize the needs of the future generations. And really, final point I wanted to make, that having had that journey of design and then that recognition just 5 years ago that we need to persuade people to think differently about what they design and why they design it, I wanted to do something as well that was tangible. I wasn't just trying to persuade people, because in a way, that's not it's not satisfying enough, really. So a couple of characters, Sam and Barney here, the photos there, you can see who I'd met at Imperial College where I'd been teaching, told me that their research into cement, unexpectedly, they'd found a way that they believed they could make zero carbon cement, zero carbon emissions. It's a long story which I won't go into, but it's now got as far as a startup that's launched from Imperial College. It's now looking for funding to build a really substantial pilot, but all the tests in the labs show that they've got materials which can replace cement or be added to traditional cements, and we could start building absolutely classic buildings that we're used to and we know are safe, using these zero carbon materials, which is very, very exciting. So to be able to, do that towards the end of my career and make a contribution to help them see daylight and to see those ideas see daylight is very, very exciting. So how do I summarize all of that? I thought I'd have a go, bring back the slide that you saw at the beginning. So sit forward, do explore as you set out on your career, see which way you want to go, and make sure you're very proactive and taking part in any opportunity that you're given. Sit forward, bring ideas to the table. So to bring ideas to the table, second line is have something to say, have an agenda, have a vision, have something that you're really excited about. And for me, it was nature and natural forms. Later on, it was about low carbon and technologies and so on, but have something to say. And then people listen, and then people invite you back, and then your career starts to blossom. I think this is the third one's really important. Give more than you take. Always be conscious about ideas that you feel that you've had need to be shared, and then you can give them away. And having given them away, they will flourish in somewhere else, and they will come back to you. And there will be a two-way, a game of tennis, or if you like, of co-creation. And it helps if you're prepared to give more than you take. Don't sort of sit back and wait until somebody has an idea before you go forward with yours. I think that's a really good thing to always remember. And don't look to take credit. Don't worry about that. Let go. Be loose with your ideas, and that's the way that you'll be able to share them and get back from other people. And then finally, maybe thinking about it, be ready to change direction. A career, a lifetime's career is a long time, and be prepared to change. Your head may tell you something, you have to change your criteria. Your heart may say you've got to follow a slightly different path. Be ready for that. Consider that your development is preparing you to be ready for change, not just ready to do more and more of the same thing. And I think that's where I'd like to stop and hand things back to Tanya.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. Well, incredibly impressive. And one of the things that I was thinking about in bringing together gold medalists was I was really interested to understand what is it that sets gold medalists apart. As I was listening to you and sort of learning much more about your career portfolio as well as your perspective on things, I think it's very obvious. At the same time, I think you are a little bit humble, perhaps in your involvement in creating an structural engineers declare the climate emergency, which has been hugely impactful. You know, really for structural engineers around the world, as well as, I guess, the tangible ways that we can apply that, which for me has been even more impactful. So, with all of that said, I think if I was a bit younger, I might say, well, that's all very good for somebody like you, Mike, but what do I do at the beginning of my career? I don't have the same opportunities with these large iconic projects. Um, I haven't worked with Ted Happold or Fry Otto. How do I emulate these types of learnings from these types of people and these types of projects?
Mm. I mean, it's a complicated question in a way, but I hope that by running through the step by steps of my career, I hope people can see I was just an ordinary student in suburb of London in my teens, going to the library, cycling to the library, and trying to learn a bit more about the world. Um, and I was just, the career that happened was a bit of luck, but also a bit of, I don't know, it's almost like a gathering, being prepared to gather more momentum and more knowledge and more capacity as time went on. And some of those things that I talked about there were ways that I think it happened. It's recognizing and sticking with people that you find that seem more interesting than the average and making extra efforts to make sure you work with them. I went with them. I didn't do the easy thing and stick with the organization where my salary was probably more reliable. I went with the people. And I so you have to be honest, you can't expect a career to build itself. You do have to do something about it. And it won't happen if you're not curious. It won't happen if you're not looking out for opportunities. It won't happen if you're not prepared to take risks and jump, if you're asked to jump and do things that are outside your comfort zone. It won't happen if you don't sit forward at meetings and be interesting and make contributions. But when you do all of those things, it happens. And people, I mean, the thing I'm often saying, people ask you back. I never, I don't know, when I was doing the British Museum project, late 90s, um, I moved to London because we wanted to, make a substantial London office. And I suddenly found I was in this treasure trove of potential clients, but they didn't come knocking. You had to go knocking on their door, and you had to be prepared to stay with them quite late into the night if necessary. And often we didn't know what we wanted to talk about, but there was a competition that we started talking about, or something, some problem they'd got, and I was prepared to give ideas, thoughts, feedback. Wasn't always the engineer on the project. So it's being prepared to give more than you
To
take.
give and do the work. But you also spoke about something that I think is really interesting, which is having the confidence to speak.
Mm,
And I think this is a really interesting concept because often as engineers, we don't like risk. And so we like to make sure we know everything, speaking for myself at least. And I think, many engineers I've worked with, we like to know that we're very confident about what we've done
mm,
before we speak up. I think as we're moving into this rapidly evolving future where the engineer is pivotal in keeping people safe, and protecting society and the environment, we need more people to have a voice and perhaps be a little bit less humble, but at the same time, be confident. How did your confidence evolve? Was it the diverse projects and people you worked with? Did that come with experience? what kind of advice would you give people in that sense?
It's a good point, and yes, I was the shyest, least confident person you could imagine. At least that's what I thought I was when I was cycling to the library when I was 15 or something. And books were my safety net. I wasn't a football playing, rugby player, team sort of guy, so it wasn't that promising at the start, if you ask me. But I found just a few people who I seemed to resonate with, and I was able to build on that. I mean, you can't expect when you haven't got the experience, it can be a bit dangerous to be overconfident. So it's okay for it to grow gradually, I think. Um, I think the basic knowledge that an engineer has is very important. You can't underplay the fact that we must understand the basics of how materials behave and respond to stresses and strains, and that's what people look to us for when we're in a team. But I think the point I realized I was interested in more than that. And then I realized that if I talked about more than that to clients, architects, and so on, they were very happy to listen too. So they try to make sure you don't, and I know I did initially, don't let yourself say, well, I'm only the structural engineer, therefore I can only talk about bending moments and choice of steel or concrete kind of thing. Join in all of the conversations, in a modest way to start, but then say, well, why don't we turn the building round? Why isn't the building shorter rather than high? And why haven't you got better shading on the south side? And just be part of the design, be part of the co-creation. It's not my job to say these things, but give ideas, give thought. And that, when it's then it's taken on board and people say, yeah, great idea, then your confidence builds. So I think it's almost like learning to swim or something. You've got to get your toe in the water and then you realize that's okay. And then you go up to your waist and you're still alive. And you've just got to keep testing. So long as you're still excited and interested um, and not stupid, you know your basics, you'll find your way in, just step
So,
by step. I think that's what happened for
so
me.
those basics, I think, are really important as well. I'm going to come back to the other part of your answer in terms of people and collaboration. Um, but in my presidential address, I talk a lot about, I believe, those foundational basics are essential now, as they always have been and will be in the future. Is that sort of what you're saying in terms of you build off those basics, and that's the work that you have to do in the beginning?
It is your foundation, but it's not the whole the whole
That it's
thing.
not everything.
Maybe
It's just
that's
a starting
yes,
point.
yes. I mean, it sounds a bit corny to say it, but I've always found myself working with excellent engineers. And of course, you sometimes you make you have to be part of that. So choosing who you work with when you're in the position of recruiting, recruiting carefully who you work with, um, giving, I hope, people some some room for themselves to grow as well, not sort of stifling them. And I think that gives you a lot more confidence too. I know I've worked with I won't name them, but I've worked with some wonderful engineers, younger than me, who understood some of the basics and some of the new technologies and so on, or even knew how to build better models than I could, physical models. So working together, it was a bit that you could create something whole, even if my contribution was perhaps more of the meal, and other people were able to build the, cook the meal. Um, so I could have done none of the projects that I'd done without fabulous engineers around me. And again, I think you have to take some responsibility for that yourself, whether you decide that you're in the wrong firm because none of that exists, or you're not working properly with those people? And could we sort of encourage them to make more contribution and be part of the team more strongly? And lots of ways you can do it, but don't don't underestimate the importance of the team, I suppose, would be the short message.
So that human element and the kind of the people aspect of engineering is something that I think comes through quite strongly in your story, in terms of your career, but also your perspective on what are some of the most powerful aspects of how we actually deliver our projects. I think that's really interesting in this moment where we're very caught up in the change into a digital world, which is rapidly evolving, and the impact that it's having on engineering. I personally think that that human aspect is even more important. The ability to, as you say, develop trust and a culture of respect in order to work in the most powerful way. What do you think about people that say that engineering practice as we know it is not going to exist in the same way because digital tools, including AI, will take over a large portion of what we currently do?
Mm. We have to be prepared for advances in technology, increasingly rapid ones. I've lived through it. My first lecture at university was to use a slide rule. That was how we did our calculations. We weren't allowed to take calculators into exam rooms, but we had to use our slide rule. And of course, things have taken off. It's that changes in introduction to technology will grow and grow. We will find ways to adapt to it. So I'm very confident in a way that we will adapt. Trying to look into the future as to how we'll adapt, it feels more and more important that engineers, even at college, that we help engineers become whole people, that we help them acquire the attributes that they will need to be robust in the face of change, to see use new technologies, and to work together in teams. And it becomes less and less. It feels to me less and less necessary to do the hard graft that we used to have to do. In my first weeks at Arup, before they'd asked me to hang nails on a model, I was filling in sheets of paper for days and days on end in order to put it into a computer, in order to do a relatively simple linear analysis of that building. None of that's necessary. It hasn't been necessary for decades, but that did in those days. So what a waste of time. What an uncreative thing to have done in my early years of a career. Um, so much of that we'll not have to waste our time with. We can replace it with much more important, communication skills, co-creation skills, idea generating, communicating what we want to do with the communities that are going to be influenced by it, affected by it, and getting their contributions in and building that into the response that we build. We'll look back and we'll think, Earth, did we ever do anything of any value when we were so blinkered and wasted so much time on scratching out drawings because we didn't even have digital drawings? It was all done with ink on plastic. So it's potentially very, very exciting. I think the boundaries of structural engineering versus civil infrastructure versus electrical versus mechanical, they might start to blur a bit too, because the need for that level of focus, I think it's quite possible to imagine qualities of a really great engineer could could spread across a wider field of work. Maybe people were doing buildings and vehicles, and um, tunnels, as well as bridges, as well as tall buildings. That it may be rather less necessary to focus tightly, which could be quite beneficial. We could get some quite creative thinking, able to work across a broader spectrum of infrastructure projects.
So, one of the things that I think is really valuable about your insight is that, as you alluded to, you kind of started with a scale rule. You started in very, what I would term sort of traditional engineering, in the sense of model making and sketching, and really, really deeply understanding material behavior and form, and structural form, which I'm not sure is so much of a focus in engineering education these days. There's a lot of talk about the challenge of what we do teach and how to fit everything in. So, in that context, knowing that the climate emergency is upon us, knowing that engineers have this pivotal role in society, and that you kind of are giving people permission, I guess, to have an agenda, to step up, to have a voice, and have that confidence. Where do you think engineering education needs to go, or is it okay as it is, in order to create the engineers of the future, and sort of leverage all of this potential that we have?
Mm. It's a very big question
Yeah,
on
sorry, my
education.
questions are big.
And I think I'm going to start early, not just jump into the kind of specialist end of university. Um, I do think we undervalue all it technology and engineering capabilities in our young school members, primary school, secondary school. There isn't a prop well. There've been attempts at engineering higher levels at school, but they've not really embedded. For me, um, translating science and maths into real change, engineering, is a fantastic way of exciting young people in science and maths, showing them the practical, life-saving, life-enhancing opportunities of, of translating science and maths into people's lives is so important. So I think we need to respect the qualities of engineering thinking and outcomes at a much earlier age. And I think we have to loosen our tie on all the kind of traditional, you must do all these things in maths, in science, in art, in literature, in and I suppose in a way help young people see the outcomes of education, the outcomes of what they're learning. Not just passing the exam is the only outcome that matter.
So
It's
the
actually
impact,
understanding the world. Yes,
the impact, and being inspired by what's possible through engineering.
yes. And you know what?
Yeah.
Thinking about it now, those visits to the library were how I was trying to work out how's this school stuff actually turn into real stuff? How does what I'm learning actually make these incredible bridges? How does it make these incredible paintings? How does it make incredible music? The education didn't seem to relate much to what was exciting in the real world. I think we could do a lot better. And I don't think our government in the UK has helped us in that recently. They've gone more traditional in just the basic, 3 R's or what they call it, arithmetic and writing and stuff. And then the same is true then of universities. There's a lot of good stuff happening more than ever, but and the Joint Board of Moderators has really moved things on in terms of setting the standards for an engineering degree, civil structural, and that's great. But there's still that connection between what you're learning and how you're learning it at university with how it really becomes valuable in the real world. Making that link isn't always happening. I think it happens more strongly in the architectural world, but there they can lose sight of the science too quickly. So I think our broader education, and it might be more possible with AI and some of the drudgery work of engineering being automated and capable of being good, even without so much human intervention. It gives more space for us to develop the character, the attributes of the person. And I think ultimately, and I haven't really talked about this enough, is build the excitement, the enthusiasm, the passion to ensure that people move into careers where that excitement and passion can turn into real stuff. Um, I think I nearly lost it when I was at university, and literally, I thought, oh, I was wrong. Engineering is actually really quite boring, and it really
Mm.
isn't what I want to do after all. And I started to think about alternative careers. And it was only that lifeline that I'd met Ted Happold, seen Fry Otto, done some really exciting stuff, and then Bureau Happold got founded, that sucked me back in. Because university made it really boring for me. Now, I'm sure things have improved a great deal, but from what I've seen, I think we could do a lot. We could go a lot further.
But that
Engineering is
tangible
so
link,
exciting. We
yeah,
must make people realize that.
that tangible link between the theory and actually the practice of it. And for me, then I think, as for you, the impact and the
Yeah.
outcome of what we can do is so inspiring.
Yeah.
So that was one of the audience questions about sort of how we can improve engineering education. Another
Yes.
question from the audience is, how do you feel about the workplace and surrounding environment and whether it plays a major role in creativity for structural engineers? I'm
Mm,
going to add to that. In addition to the environment, I'm interested to know what you think about surrounding ourselves by different people in an engineering environment and how that impacts
mm,
creativity and innovation as well. So the sort of drawing it back to people and planet in the everyday
mm.
environment.
Yes, yes. It's not just the physical environment, is it? It's the mental environment of people around you. Good point. Well, on the physical, uh, I think there's a lot that we can put up with if we're with the right people and have the right level of excitement. We could do it in a shed, or we could do it in a luxury hotel, or we could do it at home, I suspect. So I wouldn't get too so excited about that. But I am passionate, personally, about the size of the table. Just while we're here, and it absolutely drives me completely mad when you have a meeting and it's supposed to be a design meeting where we're supposed to solve some design problem, and you'd sit in such a big table that nobody can touch each other, that
Yeah.
there's no way you're going to share an idea on the table. All you can do is use words and sort of talk across the table at each other. So I've certainly been known to say, right, table in half, let's move to a different room. um, so physically being able to and get up, you need to be able to get up and pin things on the wall if you can't use your table. So I think the physicality that makes sure you're co-creating, make sure you're sharing the drawings, the diagrams, the doodles, and not all hiding behind computers as well, has always been very important for me. With students, I work with with Imperial College students. I'm teaching something called creative design, engineers. Creative design is quite a nice term. And we work in teams of 8. And nowadays, they tend to use their laptops. And I was really, really worried. But I must say that the laptop as a shared document, shared documents on the laptop, people all facing each other around a table can be quite productive because you're all seeing the same thing. It's not a shared single document. Well, it's a shared single document on 8 screens around the table. And so that's possible. But the physical environment needs to make sure you can share. You can share ideas, share what each of you's thinking through diagrams. In terms of people, I've always been lucky. I mean, as Bureau Happold grew, it was always important to Ted and the founding partners to bring in other disciplines. And so we were originally just structural engineers, then civil and structural, then building services and structure and civil, then facades, then fire, then everything else. And it was absolutely fantastic to be able to sit with all the colors of the rainbow and say, hey, can I just come and see you for 10 minutes? I'll buy the coffee. And to say, what on earth is this all about? I've been told this. Is that true? And And so you'd learn a huge amount beyond your discipline. And I think being in an environment where you can do that is very, very helpful. And if it's not something you can do within the confines of your own office, perhaps to make the most use of when you're in a team environment where other professionals have come together and sort of say, can I have half an hour of your time after the meeting? Because I want to know more about this. Um, so, yeah, I think trying to make sure you have conversations with as broad a diversity of people as you can is good. And sometimes an office environment doesn't allow that, and you may need to make a bit more effort.
to create that space for
Yeah,
collaboration.
yeah.
Um, we've got time for just one more question before we wrap up. So I'm going to finish with a question from a graduate structural engineer. And they say, if you were starting out as a graduate in today's industry, what would you have done differently?
In today's industry, I mean, it's quite hard to predict, isn't it? Because,
It
I
is.
can only know
It's a
what
tricky
my
one.
history brought me to. But for someone who's now at that door, um, I've said a lot of the things, you've got to, I
Mm.
mean, it helped me a lot to find a kind of core thing that excited me the most. Not, to try find out what it is, but see a little bit of a picture as to what you want to be able to be involved in 10 years' time or something. Do you want to become, I mean, for some people, they might want to become much more knowledgeable in a very tight space and but maybe move into academia and do research and get fascination in the world that way. Others broaden it out substantially and maybe become planners or something so they can impact on decision making rather on bigger scale. And that was something that fascinated me when I saw people, they were planning the route of the M25 and whether it went through my town or someone else's town, somebody was going to make a decision. And these are quite powerful decision making skills that it could be quite fun. So try to find a passion because I think that's and I did it by a lot of reading and trying to find people to talk to. I mean, coming to these talks that you've organised, Tanya, with some various engineers, most of them getting on towards the end of their career, listening to them and just trying to say, well, how does that resonate with me? Am I like that? Could I do that sort of thing? It's quite possible for you to say, no, that's not me. But if we can help you find yourself by saying, I don't want to be like that, then that's fine. It's about sort of finding kind of path. Because I think if you don't find something of a path, people to follow, their ideas to follow, a kind of I want to be someone who can design the next Sydney Opera House, um, you'll be a bit rudderless. And so you
That
won't know whether to say
direction.
yes to things or no to
Yeah.
things. I knew immediately that I was ready to move off and join Bureau Happold. I was ready to go to Hong Kong and do this stuff. It was all building that future capacity that I wanted to deliver to, of being responsible for Sydney Opera House type things. I've never even visited the Sydney Opera House, by the way, Tanya. I don't know if
I
you
think
can
it's time, Mike.
invite me down.
But I think you're right. I think what comes across to me more than anything is the people that you've worked with, the people that inspired you, the impact of your work, which is incredible. And that passion that's driven you to do the extra work, to continue to sort of take that direction in terms of things that have inspired you. And I hope that everyone that listens will find something that resonates with them in what you've shared in your career. You might see that we're doing this remotely, which I think is such a privilege to do. It's turned dark behind me, which means that it's evening here, and I think still morning for you. Which brings us to a close. So I'd like to finish just by saying thank you. It's been incredibly inspiring to hear from you and to have this conversation. I feel very privileged that you've shared a lot of your knowledge with me over the years. And I hope that everyone that's listening today feels equally inspired, but is also able to take something away with them into their everyday working. And with that, I hope that everyone has signed up to the call to action this year, which is to do one thing in your professional lives to make an impact towards people and planet. And we'll put a link in the chat to that. But the hope there is not necessarily to have huge impact at scale over just 1 year, but really to just create that awareness of how powerful engineering is in the world, and how privileged we are to be engineers, and that with that, I think, comes that responsibility to recognize that and to go out into the world and make that impact. So with that, again, Mike, really, this has been such a great conversation, and want to thank you again and hope to see you very soon.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Yes, I hope to see you soon in London. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been great fun.